Hello everyone, welcome back to the workshop and another Sunday video. I can't believe how quick we're rattling through them, I really can't. So this week I've seen what my brother-in-law would describe as bullshit baffles brains. I cannot believe some of the things I've seen online this week about joinery. One was cutting a tenon to fit a simple mortise, okay? So we're talking square shouldered like this. There's a flat face mortise like this. Nothing complex, nothing, no mouldings meeting like this. This is enough of a cove and a straggle glazing bar. I can't remember why it ended up on the scrap pile, but it ended up on the scrap pile. There was something wrong with it, whether I laid it out wrong or what. But anyway. So I've lobbed the bar in half. Well, not even in half. I've lobbed a section off with a mortise in that was already cut. I've then laid out a tenon on this end, and I've completely square shouldered, okay, knife lines, gauge lines, gauge line, knife lines, okay, completely square shouldered, because I'm going to put it into this side, because this was the example that was given. And the example that was given on Instagram was the guy had taken his mitre saw and he put a whole load of kerfs in here, okay, with his mitre saw, powered mitre saw. He then got his chisel and he knocked those kerf cuts off with the side of his chisel. Why the hell, when you've got a cutting tool, you would use the side of a chisel? I have no idea. Okay? The whole aspect of joinery is it should be simple. I cannot express that enough. It should be simple. So to lay out this joint, I've used a marking knife. I used a 6-inch rule solely to measure the length of the slot so I can mark my haunch. That's it. Okay? I then used a marking gauge set up to the mortise, and I used a square. That's all I used to mark out with. That's all I ever used to mark out with, unless it's an angled cut and it's a bit difficult. So that's the first element of good joinery. One, layout, marking out, setting out, call it what you will. That is element one. Element two is cutting. So we're going to cut now. And to do that, I'm going to use the family saw. I'm going to use maybe, I'm going to use a mallet, and I'm going to use a chisel. Okay. Both of these are modern chisels. Okay. I've bought both of these in the past, what? In fact, I've bought both of these in the past 13 years. Okay. So I bought my first set of these Robert Sorby's. I bought a set of 5 and then an odd size one, 2-inch one, I think, when I started training in 2001. These Ashley Isles Mark IIs came later. Okay, they're both higher end chisels, but when I get to 1,000 subscribers, I'm going to go and buy and field test a set of cheap Irwin brand chisels. Okay, and we're going to run them in the workshop and in the field, and we're going to see just how good they are. I'm literally just going to go and buy a set of sizes of chisels, and we'll go through in a set of videos, tuning them, making them work, doing some real grueling work with them, and we'll see how good they are, how long they last, etc. These are modern chisels. That's the other thing I've seen this week, is that modern chisels are shite. Well, I have to say, modern, real cheap, nasty chisels aren't the greatest. The steels in them aren't the best, but there is nothing to stop you doing this work with a set of cheap chisels from Aldi, with a set of cheap urban chisels. Do not fall into the trap of being a tool snob, because there's absolutely no need. Again, it's this keep it simple. So I'm going to define my knife lines. So I've got a definitive cut. And before everyone starts, yes, I know Paul Sellers uses this method, and I know he calls it a knife wall, but I've never, he coined that phrase. And, you know, it was something my father did. It's something I've done. So I wouldn't normally use a bench hook. I'm quite happy gripping them in the vise, sticking up over the vise. So at this point, Matey Boy on Instagram has just about got his mitre saw set up ready to make the first cut. And I've cut my shoulders. We're going back in the vise. Halfway down the depth. Oh no, we're not quite going back in the vise actually. I just need to make my third and final cut, which I'm not going to curve because I've got my two shoulder lines. That's just taking the haunch off. Okay. Back in the vise, take the hammer and chisel. Halfway, bang. See where my grain's running. Straight in the knife line because that's rising up slightly. Bang, off it comes. Pairing cut. I'm sorry I obscure the camera there, guys, but that's just how I work. I'm sorry. Okay. Same again, flip it over. Right, second side, you need to double check it. This is fairly straight ground, but you never know. So halfway again. Okay. And you're checking where your grain's running. You see it's running down here. We're going to have to be a bit more careful with this side. No, we're back straight again now. Now we've got in, so I can go straight in the gauge line. Now at this point, Matey Boy's knocked the waist off his from his saw curves, and he then starts with a router plane and starts leveling the shoulders up. Well, don't get me wrong, the router plane is a good tool, but historically they were never ever used for work like this. Okay, and I do use one. If I put a face patch repair in, absolutely I use. But from the vast amounts of work I've taken apart over the years to repair it, tenons always were knocked off like this. It's a modern thing that people were sawing tenons. Unless the grain's got a knot in, I tend to find they were split off. Okay, and I'm just shaping this tenon so it goes into the mortise because I've got relish. I've left relish on my tenon. So I've got a little bit extra to plane off with, which is quite common in joinery. We like to make sure we fit nice and square. As I say, I'm just solely at this stage looking. Okay, this isn't square, this is the back side of a piece. But why on earth are we overcomplicating joinery to the point that nobody can fit straight off the tooling? Hand tools are not slow. This is the point I'm trying to make. Hand tools really are not slow. You know, this video, the whole video explaining to you is 10 minutes long. By the time you set a mortise up, you know, you can have done it by hand with sawn shoulders. Like I say, it's not square, fits okay, but I would actually kerf though if I was working to that piece. But you can see there, this piece at some point in its life's got damp. You can see the damp stain on it. This piece is nowhere near square now. So I literally just lobbed it off. But that's how it should be. You know, this is how joinery should be. You should be aiming to fit first time, straight off the saw, straight off the chisel. You know, you shouldn't be aiming to then have to spend 4 or 5 hours pairing. If your layout is accurate, which your layout should be accurate using these tools, these few simple tools, your layout should be really accurate. And this is the point that I'm making with all these videos. Hand tools are not slow if we don't fanny about with the process. You know, some guys find the actual process of working by hand really therapeutic. Great, guys, fill your boots. You know, you carry on. Absolutely. If you find the actual process of working with hand tools really therapeutic, by all means, go for it. For me, I earn as much as my living with these tools as I do with my machine tools. So I need, like period craftsmen, everything I make is on a price. Okay, I never work day rate, ever. I've done maybe 6 day rate jobs, 10 day rate jobs perhaps, in the past 20 years. Most of those were subcontract work. But I don't do day rate work. All my work is priced before I start it, and I then have to convert that price into hours worked. You know, that joint is dead flat on the back. Okay, it's dead flat here. There's a slight bit, but that's the difference in the thickness of the timber. Okay, there's a tiny bit there, but it's dead flat here. There's no step here at all. You know, we're good and tight. Okay, and this way is fairly tight. Is inconsequential anyway, because you'd have your wedgeways in there normally. But this is what I'm saying, guys. This is why we all need to be honing our hand tool skills. Hand tool skills shouldn't be slow. Okay, they shouldn't be sloppy. They shouldn't be slow. They shouldn't be crude. There is nothing that's been done until you get to the 1950s, 60s, 70s, when we start to see sheet materials being used a lot. There is nothing in traditional joinery, anything that was made before the Second World War, none of it can't be replicated with hand tools alone. And this is something I'm trying to get across with all of this. All of the work that was done in the millennia pre-Second World War could be done entirely by hand. Not necessarily using expensive tools, because our forebears never used expensive tools. We talked ourselves into a really sort of super high standard of work. You know, we romanticize about Chippendale, about other such furniture makers. Well, in my world, in the architectural joinery world, that's not the case. And I am actually going to do a series of videos. I'm hoping to get some access to some more high status windows than most of what I do, to see if they are the same. But the stuff I take apart, whilst on the outside it looks amazing, you start to break down the nitty gritty and it's not. It's produced as I've just produced that tenon there, which to a lot of guys is mega rough. But this is why we need to keep persevering. You know, like I say, the router plane is a great way. If I was putting a face patch in there, if I was going to put a face patch in this piece here like that, and you could see this edge here, okay, because that was the depth of the patch, absolutely, I would router. I would take my router plane and I'd cut my kerfs with my hand tool first, and then absolutely I would route out. This would be my waist. I would absolutely route that to get a nice flat bottom. Absolutely I would. But we don't need to do it with joinery. We do not need to then, you know, you can see how good a fit that is. You know, we don't need to take the router plane and start leveling these surfaces. Absolutely no need. If you're going to do that, do the whole thing on your chop saw or do the whole thing on a tenon. You know, or build yourself a router jig and so your router sled passes over the top. Don't try and merge, you know, don't merge the worlds of hand and power. There's no need. If you need hand tools to finish off something you've done with your power tools, then just do it by hand. Because 9 times out of 10, it's going to be quicker, it's going to be quieter, it's going to be safer. And this is what I'm trying to get across with all these videos, is that because we've lost hand tool skills, and we have lost hand tool skills because they're not being taught, they're not being practiced, they're not being passed on. You know, there's 1 or 2 guys in the UK like me who are still working, doing a lot of work by hand. But there's not vast amounts of us, you know. A lot of guys are wood machinists, and very good ones at that. You know, there's a lot of good machine-made joinery coming out now. There's some real shit stuff coming out as well, but that's the same with any joinery work now, because the machine-made cabinets you get from Howdens are utter shite. But then there's guys making beautiful kitchens with an awful lot of machine work in there that are really good. You know, they're using very similar basic materials, but their work is so much better. They are such better machinists that it knocks the socks off the mass production. But there's a cost difference, and it's the same with the joinery world. There's some really smart windows being produced out there by guys, you know, okay, then producing modern Part Q, you know, almost UPVC looking windows, because the locks are very similar, the hinges are very similar, but there's some really good Part Q wooden windows out there that are really thermally efficient, really nicely made, but are entirely coming off machines because the wood machinists are good. My work, very little of it is new work. It's all generally repairs or replacement work for period work. And conservation officers more and more are demanding complete like-for-like replacements. I'm beginning to have to document bar sizes. I'm beginning to have to document bar mouldings and moulding sizes now for some conservation officers, so that they have a record of what was there and what is there now. And this is the kind of work that's getting me into those sorts of places. You know, as I've said before in videos, I want nobody to know that I've been there. But we've got to stop this, you know, crazy reinventing the wheel. You know, period joinery would never complicate it, and it was never complicated for a reason. You know, it had to work, and it had to be good enough for the adhesives and things at the time. So this joint would quite easily, with a drawn peg, be perfectly safe outdoors with hide glue, because it's a good tidy fit. You know, and it is a tidy fit. And with the drawn peg here, absolutely nothing is going to destruct that joint. So if we look at a window, for example, these are period bridle joints. This window's slack as anything. Okay, you can make this window move, but because there's a peg through here, see if we can see it. Let's see if we can get the peg on camera. Yeah, because there's a peg through here, okay, that joint that is as loose as anything. You can see it rocking backwards and forwards there. This joint that's as loose as anything will not fall out because there's a peg in it. Okay, simple bridle joints. You know, this is a meeting round in the top window, and that never fell out because of these pegs. Okay, these pegs here stop that window falling apart. Peg there, pop the paint off. But this is what I mean about us having to, you know, look to what we're repairing, what we're replacing. You know, very much we need to keep it simple, because the more we overcomplicate the process we use, the less of the craft and the less viable hand tool work becomes. You know, hand tool work shouldn't be slow at all. You know, I know joiners who were working piecework by hand even as late as 1975, 77. But interestingly doing a lot of conservation work. And that's what we've got to bear in mind, is that if we lose these skills, they're lost forever. And when we try and reinvent the wheel with the hand tool skills, we end up in a situation where we end up with overcomplicated processes for what really was simple. And hence my desire really to document this sort of thing on YouTube. Yes, it helps with learning, but it also documents it for future generations, for when I'm old and in my grave, that actually this kind of thing is possible, and is possible by hand. There you go. Quick video, guys, on a more than usual rant on hand tool skills. Thank you all so much for watching. If you're enjoying the videos, please make sure you like and subscribe, and let's try and build this channel onwards. You know, let's see how we get on with it. The other thing is, when I've done the real world testing on the probably there will be an Irwin Marple set of chisels, maybe a Stanley set, I don't know yet. We'll see what's on offer on the week I buy them. But once we get to 1,000 subscribers, I'm going to buy a set of chisels. They will be up for grabs. I will keep them for, you know, 3 or 4 months, and I will give them to an apprentice or to a student or the likes that I deem worthy. So yeah, keep an eye on that one, guys. But once I get to 1,000 subscribers, I will go out and buy those chisels, and then, like I say, I'll do some real world testing with them. I'll tune them up again, and I will pass them to a new woodworker or a new apprentice to get your thinking caps on, guys, as to who you deem would be worthy of something like that. Your family member or the likes, somebody you know. Because I will open it up as soon as I buy them. I will open it up for suggestions. So thank you all for watching, and I will see you all on the next video, which will be on mouldings with quirks, etc. Cheers, guys. Bye.